A lot of you have questions about your property tax bills and where property taxes and city fees are spent. Here's a breakdown of what your taxes support.
The city receives about $143 million annually in revenue. About 2/3 of that revenue comes from fees and charges. So if you're a developer taking out an application, you're paying permit fees or system development charges, impact fees that make up that revenue. 1/3 of the revenue is what we call the general fund. That's where council has the most discretion in how those funds are used. The general fund, majority of which is comprised of property taxes. And your property tax bill pays for services like police, fire, and street maintenance.
The majority of our general fund discretionary revenues come from property taxes. The city's permanent tax rate is $2.80 per thousand of assessed value. For example, for a home with a taxable assessed value of $200,000, the city receives about $560 per year. What that means is for $560 a year, the city is funding police, fire and EMS services, and street maintenance.
Of the rates and charges that folks will pay for city services, a majority of that are utilities. That includes water, stormwater, and sewer. And those rates are set every year by council.
Not only can they not be used to fund street maintenance improvements, they also are reserved specifically to fund their individual operations. So the water revenues fund the water system, sewer revenues fund the sewer system.
And those are restricted by state law. They cannot be commingled to pay for other infrastructure or other services that the city offers.
Since the city is not able to increase our permanent rate of $2.80, we have gone to the voters who have approved two different bonds and operating levies. In 2011, the voters approved the general obligation bond for transportation improvements, which covered projects such as the Reed Market Corridor. Voters also approved a 5-year operating levy for fire and EMS services in 2014, which has funded the new basic life support unit.
So property tax bills just went out in November. And so if you look at your individual bill, you'll see that about 50% of your property taxes go towards funding schools. 20% goes to city services such as police, fire, and street maintenance.
The rest of that funding goes to fund the library district, the parks district, which is not part of the city of Bend.
So in the early 1970s, the city had a need to reinvest in Juniper Swim and Fitness Center. At the time, the city couldn't afford to do that. So the city council chose to spin off Park and Recreation into its own entity. The citizens of Bend voted to create a special district for Park and Recreation. That benefited both agencies. Park and Recreation is what it is today because we have dedicated funds to be able to build the system, and allowed the city to take the funds originally dedicated to Park and Recreation and to reinvest those funds into other services.
And then a balance of other county jurisdictions like library, 911, the jail, fairgrounds make up about 20%.
The Central Oregon Community College and Deschutes County.
Rural Fire Protection District Number 2 is a taxing entity of 132 square miles that surrounds the city of Bend in order to collect taxes for the protection, to provide fire protection for the people of the district. Since Bend Fire and Rescue does not have authority to go outside the city limits, the Rural Fire Protection District gathers tax money and gives it to the Bend Fire and Rescue in order to provide that fire protection to their residents as well as to the residents of the city of Bend.
The 2/3 of revenues that come into the city that are restricted for specific purposes include utility rates, building and planning development revenues, as well as system development charges.
The city, through a 2-year budgeting process, really begins a lot of that work shortly after the first of the year, developing strategy with our council and equal number of citizens that are involved in our budget committee to really focus on what matters most to the community. So transportation is going to be a highlight. Our utility rates will be a highlight. Implementing council goals and priorities will also be integrated into that process. Budget deliberations conclude in May, with council adopting that 2-year budget in June, which is effective July 1st and carries us for 2 years until June 30th, 2019.